Stay quiet. Hide. Now, the doctor said that the moment I set the bouquet down, my hands still shaking from the cold. I came to the hospital to bring my wife home, not to hide in a dark records room. But through the crack in the door I saw my son standing beside his mother's bed, and my daughter-in-law holding papers I had never signed. That night I understood a painful contradiction. The place meant to save lives was hiding a rupture, and my family was no longer the safest place I knew. Before I go on, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Your being here is not an accident, and maybe, just like me that night, you're about to hear a truth that will leave nothing the same again. My name is Howard. I'm 68 years old, retired from engineering long enough to believe life had finally slowed down. I have a gentle wife, a few small shops to look after in my spare time, and a simple belief that family is the safest place there is. The snowy night at Street Jude Hospital proved that belief was more fragile than I ever imagined. And everything began the moment I stepped into that empty hallway. I arrived at Street Jude about 10 minutes later than planned. The snow was falling so thick it swallowed every sound. The parking lot was nearly empty, yellow lights reflecting off patches of ice. I was holding a bouquet of white roses, the kind Martha liked because, as she used to say, they weren't flashy. Her surgery was supposed to be minor, routine. I believed that. I always believed. The fourth-floor hallway was silent. My footsteps echoed, then echoed again, like someone else was walking just behind me. I checked my watch. Visiting hours were over. I was about to ask a nurse for permission when a door suddenly opened. Dr. Miller stepped out. His white coat wasn't even buttoned yet. He didn't greet me. He didn't ask who I was. He grabbed my wrist and pulled me into a records room. Dark, cramped smelling of old paper and chemicals that stung my eyes. "Stay quiet," he said, his voice so low I had to lean in to hear him. "And hide." I thought he was joking, or that he had me confused with someone else. I lifted the flowers like harmless proof. He pressed a hand over my mouth, his eyes hard. "If you want to keep things intact," he said, "do not step outside." The door closed. The fluorescent light flickered. My heart slowed in a strange way, as if my body was trying to protect itself. Miller cracked the door open and motioned for me to look through the narrow gap across from room 402. I saw Martha's hospital bed. I saw the familiar machines. And I saw Logan. My son stood there, arms crossed, posture straight. Chloe was beside him. Hair neatly styled, an expensive coat draped over a chair. They didn't look toward me. They spoke softly but clearly, like the room belonged to them. I didn't hear everything, but I heard enough to know I was standing in the wrong place, inside my own family. Miller whispered explanations, broken sentences, like he was assembling a picture he'd been staring at for too long. There were times Martha reacted oddly to medication, evenings when she sounded confused, then apologized, saying her head wasn't clear, symptoms that didn't match her file. He had made notes, he had asked questions, and he had begun to suspect something. "I need time," Miller said. "But they don't." I looked back at room 402. Logan pulled a folder from his bag. I recognized the cover. I'd seen it once, on my own lawyer's desk. Chloe pointed to a section, her lips pressed tight. Logan nodded. That nod sent a chill through me. Not because I didn't know what the papers were, but because of how it happened. Fast, clean, no hesitation. I thought about the years I buried myself in work, the long trips, the checks I sent believing money was the best way to stay close to my son, the late dinners, Martha waiting with a tired smile. I remembered my promise that I would slow down when I retired. I did. But maybe I slowed down later than other plans did. A nurse walked past in the hallway. Miller quietly pulled the door shut a little more. "They're accelerating everything," he said. "Paperwork, capacity evaluations, administrative steps. From a distance, it all looks legitimate." And up close I asked. My voice was dry, not shaking. "Up close," he said, "there's too much silence." Silence. I heard that word for the second time in 10 minutes. It was no longer advice. It was a condition. I looked down at the flowers in my hand. One petal fell to the floor, crushed under someone's shoe, leaving a faint, wet mark. I bent to pick it up, then stopped. I let it stay there. Some things, once they touch the ground, are better left where they fall. Miller went on, about cameras in the side corridors, about unusual gaps in timing, about data accessed outside proper procedure. He didn't accuse anyone. He simply laid the pieces on the table. I looked at them and understood this much. If I stepped out of that room right now, I would ruin everything. I leaned back against the file shelves. For the first time in many years, I didn't rush to fix things. I waited. I watched. I memorized. I let the cold of that snowy night sink into my thoughts, sharpening them. Through the narrow crack in the door, Chloe gave a thin smile. Logan checked his watch, a kind of urgency that didn't belong in a hospital. That's when I understood. This night wasn't just a late shift or a delayed procedure. It was a door closing. And if I didn't stand exactly where I was, it would slam shut on everything I had spent a lifetime trying to protect. I stayed in the records room for almost another 10 minutes. Time inside a hospital doesn't move the way it does outside. It bends, shaped by the steady hum of machines and footsteps that never truly stop. Miller didn't say anything more. He let me watch, let me listen, let me connect the pieces myself. Maybe he understood that for a father, the truth needs to be uncovered slowly, not thrown straight into his face. The door to room 402 opened, then closed again. An administrative staff member stepped in, holding a gray folder. I saw Logan take one step forward, say something brief. Chloe tilted her head, her gaze firm, controlling. The staff member nodded, set the folder down, and left. No argument, no questions. Everything moved too smoothly. Smoothly enough to feel wrong. Miller leaned close to my ear. "They're requesting a decision-making capacity evaluation," he whispered, "based on recent notes." I understood immediately. The notes about Martha being confused. The broken sentences she had apologized to me for. The mornings she asked what day it was. I had told myself it was post-surgery fatigue. Age. A long winter. I chose the easiest explanation to believe. Through the narrow crack, Logan opened his bag and pulled out a thicker stack of papers. This time I recognized it clearly. Bold title. My sample signature on the first page. I had signed it years ago, in a warm office, to protect my family. Now it lay on my wife's hospital bed, like something that didn't belong there. Chloe said something that made Logan pause. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw her lips form a thin smile. She leaned in, pointed at her phone screen. Logan exhaled, then nodded again. This nod carried no hesitation. Miller pulled me back as Logan moved closer to the door. We held our breath. Logan stepped into the hallway, made a call. His voice was low, rushed. I caught only fragments. "Tonight. Everything's ready. Can't wait any longer." He went back inside and closed the door. I turned to Miller. "You said they don't have time," I said. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at me, weighing his words. "Because some decisions," he said slowly, "only work when someone else no longer has the ability to object." I didn't ask him to finish. I didn't need to. Inside room 402, Chloe opened her handbag and took out a small, unlabeled bottle. She placed it beside the cup of water on the table. Quick, discreet. Logan glanced around, then turned away. My stomach tightened, but my mind felt frighteningly cold. I didn't think about what was in the bottle. I thought about the past month. The evenings, when Martha looked at me, as if she wanted to say something, then stopped. The times she held my hand tighter than usual. Chloe spoke again, loud enough for pieces to slip through the door. She talked about evaluations, about oversight authority, about asset transition. Dry administrative words. Logan stayed silent. His silence wasn't resistance. It was consent. Then Chloe said something else. Logan turned toward her. I saw his hand tremble slightly. He shook his head. Chloe stepped closer, speaking fast, pressing. I didn't hear it all, but I saw the slap. Not loud, not dramatic, just a sharp hit to his shoulder, enough to push him back into place. She pointed toward the window where the snow was still falling. I read her lips. "Tonight." Miller placed a hand on my shoulder. That's when I realized I was gripping the edge of the file shelf so hard my knuckles had gone white. "I held back the test samples," he said. "Not through standard procedure. I need proof before everything gets sealed." "The cameras," I asked. He shook his head. "There are gaps." Gaps. Another word. I was starting to understand that the most dangerous things weren't what happened in plain sight, but the empty spaces created on purpose. I looked at Logan again. My son. The boy I taught to ride a bike, picked up from airports at midnight, paid debts for, without asking why. He stood there now, between his mother's hospital bed and my paperwork, choosing not to meet her eyes. I didn't want to step out yet. I wanted to see how far they would go when they believed no one was watching. I wanted to hear what they said when they thought everything was settled. The truth, when left alone, often reveals itself. Chloe handed the cup of water to Martha. My wife turned her head away, weak. Chloe set the cup down and waited. Logan checked his watch again. That urgency returned. Stronger this time, Miller whispered. If you show yourself now, they'll stop, but they'll find another way. I understood. My presence right now would only patch the surface. I needed them to keep going, to let what they were relying on expose itself. I nodded, not out of courage, but because there were no easy choices left. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the papers were rearranged, neat, precise. A plan that believed itself perfect was moving toward its final moment. And I, for the first time, was no longer standing at the center of my family, but in the shadows, waiting for the silence to be exposed. I didn't step out of the shadows right away. After Chloe set the cup down and Logan turned away, room 402 slipped into a strange state of waiting. No one spoke. No one rushed. The silence thickened, like fresh ice forming over a road. I understood then. They believed everything was locked into place. Miller guided me deeper between the shelves, where the hallway cameras couldn't see. He opened a low drawer and took out a small sealed bag. Inside were test vials, carefully labeled. I kept these, he said, not to accuse anyone, just to make sure that if something is covered up, it still leaves a trace. I nodded. I didn't ask how he managed to keep them. Some questions once answered make everything more fragile. I only needed to know that somewhere in this night, the truth hadn't been fully sealed yet. We heard a medical cart roll past. A security guard glanced into the records room, then moved on. Miller let out a quiet breath. Someone interfered with the secondary camera system, he said. Not all of it, just enough to create gaps. Gaps again. I was starting to see the pattern. It didn't take much force, just the right place, the right moment. I thought about my years designing systems, how one loose bolt could throw an entire line off, without anyone noticing right away. Through the crack in the door, Logan placed an iPad on the table beside the bed. The screen lit up. I recognized the interface immediately, the one I used to sign documents remotely. I remembered setting it up for convenience during trips. I remembered believing convenience was harmless. You see it, don't you? Miller whispered. I did, and I understood. It wasn't my signature. It was a composite, stitched together from old strokes, close enough to pass the system if no one looked carefully. A temporary technical solution. But in the middle of the night, it could go very far. A brief heat ran up my spine, then disappeared. I didn't shout. I didn't pound on the door. I simply took note. The engineer in me woke up, even after all these years of retirement. I remembered authentication steps, the small tolerances rushed people tend to ignore. I knew there were ways to prove an electronic signature had been compromised, if the device and the timing could be preserved. Miller looked at me as if reading the thought. I can hold on to the iPad, he said. If there's a medical reason. I nodded again. Medical reason. The words sounded thin, but inside a hospital they carried their own weight. We waited. Time passed in the steady rhythm of monitor beeps. Then Chloe returned to the table and picked up the iPad. She typed something, quick, precise. Logan stood behind her, one hand on the back of the chair. He leaned in, spoke quietly. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the tension in his shoulders. Suddenly an old memory surfaced, without warning. 30 years ago in a different clinic, a doctor had handed me a sealed envelope. I didn't open it right away. I took it home, placed it deep in a drawer, where only I knew. Test results, a truth I chose to keep silent, to keep a family intact. I didn't know why that memory returned now. Maybe because the pieces were finally finding each other. Miller touched my hand lightly. Howard, he said, the first time he used my name that night, there's something you should know. Not directly about them, but about you. I looked at him. He didn't circle around it. He spoke about an old sample, a file I once asked him to keep confidential, a result he had never forgotten. I listened, each word landing slowly. I already knew, but hearing it spoken out loud, here, now, changed the color of everything. Logan is not my blood. I had lived with that truth for 30 years, never once letting it change the way I called him my son. I chose silence, believing love didn't need proof. Tonight, that silence suddenly weighed more than anything else. Through the crack in the door, Logan placed his hand on the iPad, ready to complete the action. Chloe stood close eyes fixed on the screen. I looked at them, and in that moment the pain didn't come from betrayal of assets. It came from realizing that everything I had kept hidden to protect them had not been returned, with even the smallest restraint. "I don't want to use this," I said to Miller. "Not to win." "No one's talking about winning," he replied. "Just about not letting things be sealed by a gap." A nurse stepped into room 402 asking about Martha's condition. Chloe answered smoothly. Logan stepped back one pace. The iPad remained on the table. Miller looked at me. I understood the signal. This was the moment. He walked in, calm, composed the way a doctor does when handling difficult situations. He spoke about a metric that needed to be rechecked, about temporarily holding the device to prevent interference. No one objected. Chloe pressed her lips together but said nothing. Logan watched the iPad leave the room, a flicker of something like panic crossing his face. When the door closed, I leaned back against the wall. The truth about the signature, the camera gaps, the test samples, the bloodline, they intertwined, forming a quiet pressure. I didn't collapse. I just felt myself age a few more years in a single night. Miller returned the iPad in his hands. Now, he said, we have time. Time. The one thing they didn't have. The thing I had lost too much of, believing it would always be there. I took a deep breath, feeling the cold seep through my coat. The night wasn't over, and I knew that to fully expose the silence, I would have to step out of the shadows, in my own way. The time Miller mentioned wasn't long, but it was enough to change the direction of everything. I didn't stay still anymore. Once the iPad was taken away, room 402 lost its familiar sense of control. I saw Chloe move faster, her voice low but sharp. Logan answered in short phrases, his eyes drifting again and again toward the door. They didn't know where I was, but they could feel that something was no longer in their hands. I straightened my collar and took a deep breath. The cold was still there, but it no longer slowed me down. I nodded at Miller. No words needed. He understood. This was the part I had to step into on my own. The records room door opened. Hallway light poured in, blinding me for a moment. I walked slowly, deliberately, letting my steps look unsteady. My shoulders sagged. My breathing grew heavy, a familiar image to them, the aging father they had learned to underestimate. Logan saw me first. His eyes widened, then quickly pulled back. Chloe spun around, her expression shifting fast, from surprise to irritation to a cold calm. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Logan asked. His voice was higher than usual. "I came to take my wife home," I said. I let the words land without explanation. I took another step, then faltered, as if losing my balance. Chloe moved quickly and caught me. Her grip was tighter than necessary. "Dad isn't well," she said loudly enough for the nurse in the hallway to hear. "He should sit down." I leaned into her for exactly one beat. Then I heard paper rustling behind me. Logan was shoving the folder back into his bag. Clumsy. Rushed. I noted every detail. "Let me stand," I said. "I can still stand." Chloe didn't let go right away. She shifted her foot, subtly blocking the space between me and Martha's bed. I looked past her shoulder. My wife lay there, eyes closed, her face paler than I remembered. A dull ache pressed into my chest, but I held it back. Not now. "Tonight has been a lot," Chloe said, her voice softening on purpose. "You should rest." I nodded slightly as if agreeing. Then I took another step. This time Chloe pushed me. Not hard, just enough. I fell into the chair beside me, my shoulder hitting the armrest. A dry sound echoed. I heard someone inhale sharply. "You see," she said quickly, "you're not stable." Logan stood frozen. He looked at me, then at Chloe. I saw hesitation flicker across his face. Brief. Gone. He turned away like a decision had been made. "Get the papers," Chloe said quietly. Logan opened his bag and pulled out the folder. He set it on the table in front of me. "Dad just needs to confirm," he said. "So everything can be settled." I looked at the familiar lines, the carefully chosen words written to sound reasonable. I lifted my hand. It trembled slightly, just as they expected. Logan leaned in, guiding my finger to the right spot. I could feel his pulse, faster than normal. "Son," I said. My voice was rough but clear. Logan stopped and looked up. "Do you remember the first time I taught you how to drive?" He froze. Chloe frowned. "This isn't the time I remember," I continued, not looking at her. "I remember because I was afraid that day. Not of an accident, but of you thinking I wouldn't be there if you let go of the wheel." Logan swallowed. His hand still held mine. I tightened my grip, for the first time strong enough to force him to meet my eyes. 30 years ago, I said slowly, I learned a truth. I chose to keep silent. I believed love was big enough to cover every gap. The room went completely still. I saw Chloe tense. Logan couldn't pull his hand away. "Tonight," I went on, "you didn't just put these papers on the table. You closed the last thing I was trying to keep for you." Logan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Chloe reached for him, but it was too late. The door swung open. Footsteps struck the floor, firm, controlled. Miller entered with 2 people in plain clothes. No one shouted. No one ran. Everything unfolded with a quiet that was terrifying. Chloe released my arm and stepped back half a pace. "There's been a misunderstanding," she said, still trying to sound calm. Miller placed the iPad on the table. "We need to clarify a few things," he said, "about this device, and about the gaps in the records." Logan pulled his hand away from mine. He looked around, searching for an exit that didn't exist. I looked at him for the last time that night. No anger left, only a deep, settled exhaustion. I stayed seated. My shoulder throbbed, but my mind felt strangely clear. What needed to be said had been said. What needed to be exposed no longer had anywhere to hide. Outside, the snow kept falling, unaware of the boundaries that had just been broken inside this room. After the door to room 402 closed once more, the hospital settled back into its familiar, slow rhythm. No more rushed voices, no more hurried movements, only the steady beeping of monitors and Martha's fragile breathing. I sat beside her bed, my hand holding hers. For the first time that night, it wasn't to keep silent, but to hold on to something that was still intact. Miller stood at the far end of the room, exchanged a few quiet words with the others, then left. No one asked me anything else. Some things once placed where they belong don't need explaining. I looked at Martha. Her face was still pale, but her breathing was steadier. I told myself that if this was all the night took, then it hadn't taken everything. The days that followed moved slowly. The hospital was no longer a dark maze. It became a place of procedures, paperwork, brief meetings with lawyers and investigators. I spoke when needed. I stayed quiet when I didn't have to speak. I didn't tell Martha everything right away. She needed time to heal before facing what had been hidden for too long. Miller kept his word. The test samples were re-examined. The gaps were filled with data. No heavy language was required, only clarity. I signed the necessary documents by hand, slowly, one stroke at a time. This time, my signature wasn't for transferring control. It was to close a chapter. When Martha was more alert, I told her what she needed to know. No more, no less. She listened, staring at the ceiling for a long time. Then she turned toward me and squeezed my hand. "We still have each other," she said. That simple sentence lightened everything. Not because it erased the damage, but because it reset what mattered most. Winter in Chicago lingered a few more weeks. The snow slowly melted, leaving gray, wet streaks on the sidewalks. I took Martha out of the hospital on a cold but bright morning. There were no flowers, only the old scarf I brought from home. She smiled and said that was enough. We didn't return to the old house right away. I sold off what we no longer needed. The small chain of convenience stores was transferred according to plans I had prepared long ago. But this time, everything was open and transparent. I didn't keep much. At this age, ownership no longer made me feel safe. What remained I put into a small fund. No noise, no big signs, just a place to support older people who need a voice when they no longer have the strength to speak loudly. I gave it a simple name, to remind myself that protection isn't control, it's listening. Martha and I began taking short trips. Not around the world, the way people like to say. Just places we once promised we'd visit and never did. A quiet coastal town, an empty mountain road. We traveled slowly, We stopped often. I learned not to rush. She learned not to apologize for being tired. Some evenings, sitting together in a small guest room, I thought about Logan, not with anger. Just a clean, honest sadness. I didn't try to justify him. I didn't deny what happened. I understood that some relationships don't end because love is missing, but because it was used the wrong way. One early spring day, Martha and I stood before my parents' graves. The snow was gone, the soil still damp. I placed my hand on the cold stone and said nothing. Martha stood beside me, hand in mine. A light wind passed through. No grand symbols, just a moment quiet enough for me to breathe out. I realized then, kindness doesn't disappear when it's taken advantage of. It just needs to be placed back where it belongs. And silence, when broken at the right time, doesn't destroy a family. It helps what remains stand more firmly. As we walked away, sunlight filtered through bare branches, signaling a new season. I didn't think about starting over. I thought about continuing, with clearer boundaries, and with a calm it had taken me far too long to recover. If you've stayed with me until the end of this story, thank you for listening to the very last moments. If it gave you something to think about, please tap like to support the channel, subscribe so you don't miss future stories, and share it if you believe someone out there might need to hear this. The lesson I took from all of this is simple. Kindness isn't wrong, but it needs boundaries. Family is not a place to exploit, and the silence of older people doesn't mean they don't understand. When we speak up at the right moment, not for revenge but to protect dignity, fairness finds its own way. Thank you for staying. I wish you the clarity to love deeply and the courage to protect yourself.